Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. In our webinar today, we're going to be reflecting on some of the key messages and themes that we noticed in BETT 2022 held in London this year. Before we begin, let me introduce you to today's panel. So, Tom, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tom Rogers. I'm a history teacher, also director of Teachers Talk Radio, Teachmeeticons and Edudate.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today. We're going to really have some great conversations and I massively appreciate your input. John, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm John Scanlon. I am General Manager of Bulb, so responsible for everything outside of the Americas. And I've been with Bulb many years and working within education for many years. And because of my role, I get to hear a lot of different voices around the world and what's going on in different countries, etc.
Thank you. And then there's me. I'm Kira Duggan. I recently left the classroom after 10 years of teaching humanities and being an EAL specialist. And I've joined Bulb in part of John's team, and I'm a customer success manager. So I'm somewhere between the classroom and Edtech. Now, BETT is a global show. If you've never heard about it, let me just quickly explain it to you. It is a series of global shows that showcase education technology in the market. The flagship show is in London and it returned for the first time for 2 years at the end of March 2022. They reported that over 20,000 people visited BETT this year. There were over 400 solution providers from over 50 countries and 300 inspiring speakers. What we're going to talk through today are some of those key messages that were coming up again and again throughout the BETT show. So we're going to start with our first one. The resounding message that we picked up is that EdTech is here to stay. Many teachers have spoken about how that move to remote teaching and learning meant that they embraced educational technology in a way they've never done before. Overnight, teachers were learning more in a day than they'd learned in maybe years of their pedagogy. But how do we think EdTech is going to continue to be used within the classroom? Tom, are you able to start to challenge that question out, please? So how can EdTech continue to be used in our classroom now that we're back to in-person teaching?
I think really it's about using it in the way that it's always been used, but try to enhance that using the knowledge and experience that teachers have got through the pandemic. So for example, for me, using things like Mentimeter, using things like Teams and even Google apps in ways that maybe I had not thought of using them before, or starting to use tools in ways that are more effective or more impactful. So I don't necessarily think that this is about changing approaches now. I think it's about building on the approaches that have come to the fore more. I think what it has demonstrated the last couple of years is how integral a role EdTech can play in the classroom. I think it's shown that we need to try and incorporate it as much as we can, not only for minimizing workload for teachers, but also for the effectiveness of teaching and learning. I mean, the way in which you can use products, apps, services to enhance what you do in the classroom has never been more clear than it is now. And actually 2-3 years ago, there were things that I never would have thought of doing that I started doing. There were little things that I'd done before, like recording feedback, for example, but not on the scale that I did it over those 2 years.
So have you found that kind of using EdTech over the last 2 years has continued to enhance your teaching practice? I mean, what have you maintained from that remote teaching and learning that you now use within your classroom?
Well, I think some of it is just is simplifying and incorporating the technology into stuff that I was already doing. So for example, quizzing. you know, using things like Mentimeter, or even just not even using Mentimeter, even just using simple things like the chat function on, you know, on Zoom or Teams or whatever it is you're using to actually enhance. I mean, it's just little things like that, using accessibility tools that you wouldn't have thought of using before. So for example, when I've made videos, I've looked at captioning them and subtitling them and incorporating pause breaks in there and incorporating other apps into those videos rather than just making it a video, so making it more interactive. Things like that is how my practice changed, and probably will continue to evolve in that way moving forward. You know, those tools aren't going to just be left for dead. Those are things that I'm going to continue to use.
Definitely, because EdTech is here to stay. I mean, that was such a resounding message. People are talking about how EdTech has just been embraced by education in a way that hasn't been seen yet across the EdTech industry. Now,
I think one thing, Kira, with that is the accessibility to technology now. A lot of countries around the world realise that if we're going to move to the remote hybrid model of teaching and learning, we need to facilitate that with funding for devices. So with those devices now returning back to the classroom with students, accessibility to that technology is, I think, beyond anywhere it's ever been before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we heard from, was it Estonia, who were talking about how by 2035, every student will have a personal device within the classroom. We'll touch a little bit on that a bit later. Now, not only will students have access to devices, but there was a conversation around evidencing learning. So that's the next big takeaway that we had, that evidencing learning is more important than ever before. One panel was discussing how there's this unequal balance between the importance put onto summative assessment versus formative assessment. Yet it's the skills and those soft skills that you develop during formative assessment that really stay with you when you move into your career and your lifelong learning journey. It begs the question then, what is it that we want our students to leave education with? Do we want them to leave with a good grade? Obviously, but what else do we want them to have?
Is that a question to me?
Anyone, open it up. Or John, what would you like?
John, do you want to answer, or do you want me to answer?
Yeah, I'll speak certainly from a higher education perspective. I know a lot of our audience is K-12, but certainly been involved globally in education. What we're seeing is, you're correct, it's the soft skills. You know, universities are now requesting portfolios from students to attend, you know, with regards to moving into careers. You know, the grade's fine, you're a great student, you can hit the grade, but do you have the soft skills? Can you deal with conflict? Can you fit in a team? What have you learned through your 14 years plus in education beyond how to pass a test? And then more importantly is being able to share that. Everyone can say whatever they want about themselves, but the real power is to say, this was me in this situation, here's a video, here's audio, here's feedback from people I was working with, etc. And so having that portfolio of evidence over a long period of time allows future universities, future employers to make the right choice, especially as, you know, the job market at the moment is quite buoyant. And we're moving towards a gig economy where people won't be in a job for 5 years. They'll be there for 3 months, 6 months, and they'll be moving on to keep, because that's what this generation wants. And so, yeah, evidence learning, more important than ever.
So how do we think that could translate to the assessment system that we currently have within schools? I mean, are we talking about a return back to like the national record of achievement, or are we talking about something a bit more?
I think I had a record of achievement, a purple folder with a few printed out pieces of paper. Doesn't say anything about me other than I was a very good student and passed all my exams, but that's no use to an employer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it has to be accessible in many different ways. You know, if I'm applying for a job, I want them to be able to look at who I am, delve into my background on a mobile phone, on a laptop, whatever's comfortable to them, as opposed to a completely flat, dead CV, 2 pages, they all look the same, they've all got bullet points, and the average is about 17 seconds recruiters said spend on them. If it's engaging, if it's video, if it's audio, you're going to be head and shoulders above everyone else. And that's the way we need to move, because that is the type of content people are used to absorbing now.
Yeah, brilliant. And Tom, what do you think?
No, I agree with all that. I think that, I think when we were talking about this immediately after BETT, this idea that of what students can actually do, I can play the piano, I can, whatever it is, create I can code this particular program, and being able to record and evidence those things is going to be more and more important, because the differentiation between students who have a set of exam results is probably going to become more and more difficult for employers to ascertain, actually what is the difference between these candidates. And I think, yes, that I used to have the record of achievement, and actually, in my record of achievement, I remember I did have, things like, SVPs, like volunteering and things of that nature. But I think that being able to now possibly digitize that obviously is gonna be more powerful. And actually, even in the job sphere in terms of education, you're seeing companies spring up now who are digitizing the application process, where they're collecting information from teachers, like teaching videos and videos of teachers explaining things, and they're putting it all together into this portfolio to then apply for a teaching job. So actually, it's something that will become more apparent across domains. And I think it's interesting that evidence learning is something that we've really, at certain points in the last probably 20, 30 years, evidencing learning has been evidencing exams, evidencing exam results. That's what evidencing learning has been. That's what it still is in some government circles. That's what evidencing learning means. But I think that in the not so distant future, we're already on that journey to that evolving and changing. But I think in 10, 20, 30 years time, it'll be more common for people to have things that they can evidence that they can do, rather than just grades on a piece of paper or whatever, that show that they've done well, that they are accomplished at passing one-off tests.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, evidencing the journey, and I guess not just that end result, is so important. Interesting that you mentioned about teachers and their creativity in videos, because that links onto our next big takeaway, which is that Edtech.
Sorry, I think, maybe I led that into employment, but it's actually in the K-12 space, when you look at the transition in step changes of education from primary to secondary, etc., it's, if you're evidencing that learning those soft skills from a teacher or a student coming in mid-school, it's going to give them a much better understanding about how they learn, who they are, and that's just going to make it much easier for the transition into a new class, into a new school for that student. And then when you add on the ability for parents to see what's going on as well, how the students learning, how they can support them at home in that, if they're struggling and that sort of thing. But from a parent's point of view, my children, one's in university now, and I got to speak to my teachers, my child's teachers, twice a year. All they did was say, yeah, he's in this percentile of class, this is what we predict as a result. Doesn't tell me anything about who he is as a learner, how I can support him. Is he a parrot fashion learner where he just reads and copies, or does he need to work through problems, etc.? So at every stage, I think it's really useful to have that evidence of everything that goes on, how you learn, who you are, and what you enjoy as well.
That's really interesting about transition, actually. I worked in a school, a high school, where one inset day a year, we'd go into a primary school to see how they learn. And it is amazing how much they cover in primary school that we don't always account for. We didn't in the secondary school. So to have that ability to show your soft skills and to show your learning and your type or your style of learner going up would be so helpful. And like you said, from each transition upwards. Now, heading back to creativity in teachers, that is our third big takeaway, that EdTech needs to enhance the learning experience and not replace it. Something that I personally really enjoyed during remote teaching and learning was watching the creativity of other professionals around the country. I mean, I became completely obsessed with YouTube channels, looking at other people's resources. I used them. I even uploaded some of my own. You've never learned about the Catholic magisterium unless it's to the tune of Mamma Mia. So you can go and search that one. But the use of EdTech can have really positive impact on learning. I've noticed that my pedagogy really changed. And I know that, Tom, you also embraced that move to kind of EdTech and teachers becoming more digitally savvy during COVID. Can you just quickly share with us how you explored that new teacher community found online?
Well, before I move on to that, I mean, just in the classroom, you know, using, one of the things that I did was I used Oak National Academy, and I kind of integrated that into my lesson. So, I was kind of I was team teaching with Oak basically, and I was pausing, and then I was inputting, and I was using their quizzes, and I was using the actual content, and then I was kind of checking in, and I was using the quizzing, and I was using the tools. It was a little bit like flipped learning, but within a classroom a little bit. So that was interesting, and that was an interesting use of tech to enhance the learning experience of the students in the classroom that I was actually working in with those students, and they liked that. You know, the feedback they gave was, you know, we liked the digital experience. I mean, of course, that's my fire alarm.
Oh,
2 seconds.
Gosh. Well, no, I mean, I did a very similar thing where I was teaching my own lessons and then using some of the resources online as additional materials. So if there was a point, for example, that students maybe wanted a little bit more information about, I could direct them to some of the creative things online. Something, though, that was mentioned a lot around EdTech enhancing and not replacing the learning experience was about well-being and about workload also. Teachers' workload is a conversation that's happening all around the world. Teachers have been embracing all of this new technology, but EdTech companies want to make sure that what they're offering doesn't add to the workload, but instead hopefully takes away from it, but certainly complements the work that they're already doing. I mean, do you have any experience of that, John, when it comes to your sons, for example? Have you noticed kind of a change towards use of more digital apps or features within their learning?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. So there's 7 years between my children. And so when my youngest started school, it was before they had computer labs. They didn't have iPads, they didn't have laptops, etc. So they didn't have that access to technology that we have. When my second child, my last child, joined, when he joined the school, it was like, right, we're going to go for a one-to-one iPad relationship. Then when he joined secondary school, it's like, right, we need you to have a laptop. That just wasn't there for my first son, and that's just in a short period of time. And what I do is I see the tech savviness, even though they're learning on it, what they're actually doing is absorbing how to use technology and multiple sources of information. So when I saw my son studying, he had YouTube on, he was listening to music, he was writing something down, he was typing something. I was like, how can you do that? When I was younger, it was me and a textbook. How can you? That's just the way I learn. I'm just absorbing information from everywhere. So to see that just systematic change in the way they learn, obviously I'm not a teacher, but very different. And I find YouTube, for example, just my sons watch engineering, particle physics, things like that on it. And they'll just sit and watch it and absorb it whilst on their phone and listen to music and everything. So it's just absorbing it like sponges and that knowledge. So yeah, I've seen a huge change in my lifetime and even the 7 years between my children as well.
Yeah, there's been this massive increase as well, hasn't there, about digital literacy? I mean, ultimately, we're preparing students for the world beyond the classroom, and increasingly that is a digital world. There's an incredible statistic that I don't quite remember off the top of my head, that the students in the classroom now are being prepared for jobs that don't exist. But I'll have to find out what that statistic is exactly. But what we do know is that it's going to be a very digitally heavy world in the job market kind of coming ahead. I mean, I don't know if you remember when those self-service checkouts arrived in the supermarkets. People were like, whoa, what a change. And how much more have we progressed as a society since then? It's really, really fascinating.
I think one area in the classroom is going to be when there's too much technology. So some schools, I know my son's school, ban mobile phones, pretty much just not allowed on site, while some schools actually embrace it, because they know they're going to be a mobile phone or a device to interact with continually for the rest of your life. You know, we're all sat at computers or devices at the moment. I sit at it 10 hours a day. So I think that's going to be a challenge in the classroom in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. Tom, are you ready to join us again? No, in a minute.
This is the 4th time now in the last 48 hours that this has gone off, and the fire brigade are here again. So
gosh.
Should you not be leaving the building, Tom?
Yeah,
no,
stay safe.
no, I'm not. It's the 4th time in the last 48 hours. So it's no.
Fair enough. Well, then we'll just move forward to our last takeaway, and we'll come back to Edtech once Tom can join us. So we started to touch on this, John, that a digital environment needs to be maintained whilst avoiding digital saturation. This term digital saturation was mentioned by a number of people around BETT, both presenters and people we were talking to, who were saying, look, I've been looking at my screen for 2 years. I need a little bit more social interaction. I just want to get back maybe to the textbooks. But there was a massive acknowledgement about how the digital environment is incredibly important. I mentioned earlier about Estonia, for example. They have got an education strategy that began last year that wants to digitize their entire curriculum, national curriculum. Every student is to have access to a personal device, and everything will be available online, though teaching will still obviously happen within the classroom. Portugal introduced a similar plan in 2020. They called theirs the conceptual framework for the student's profile by the end of school. Both of these plans are aiming to encourage a digital literacy within our students that mean that they are just ready to step out into the wider world after they've finished formal education and can then embrace any digital challenge or part of the job that comes up against them. It isn't unique to either of those countries, obviously, but how can we make sure that we are avoiding this digital saturation while still maintaining the digital literacy that certainly I didn't realize I had, and many of my students didn't realize they had until we had to start using it? How do we make sure there's that balance?
I suppose it's how you read into digital saturation. So I imagine the teachers were in the classroom, and we've said they've all adopted technology. It's been a huge learning curve, but the digital saturation could be because when you look for something, I want a distance classroom, virtual distance classroom, everyone can join. There's 50. There's probably more than 50. Which one do you choose? You go Google, you go Microsoft, you go Zoom. So you've got 3 to choose from, all do the same. It's not as simple as I've got this one task I want to do. What can do that for me? There's 100 different things that do that for you. And when you look at all the different things that you want to do in the classroom, you're then talking about thousands of pieces of software. And a lot of organizations made them available freely during COVID to support education. So you're just bombarded. You got 200 emails in, here you go, here's our free software to help you with the classroom. So I think that may cause some of the perceived digital saturation. And I think the way to avoid that is really to choose the tools that you're comfortable with. Find what you want to do. I think it's worth look at multiple tools because they're all going to have different benefits, but find the one that you're comfortable with, you feel your students are engaging with, and also saves you time.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't want to be adding to your workload and learning steep learning curves, etc. So yeah, it will take a little bit of upfront effort so you don't hit saturation in your classroom, but eventually you'll just work with your peers across the school to actually, this is a really good tool. I think we should use this. And I think that's how you avoid the saturation, not just using technology because it's there. Use it to solve a problem, to help enhance learning, to reduce your workload, and then everyone's much happier along the path.
That's the digital saturation alarm. That's what that is. That's why they're going to fit these in classrooms, and when kids are getting too digitally saturated, that's going to go off and people are going to flood out of there to get some fresh air and some sunshine, you know?
So surely you just need to refresh it or turn it off and on again.
No, it's not in my flat. It's the whole block of flats. Everyone in this block of flats is currently digitally saturated. Everyone.
Well, I mean, something actually just building on what you said, John, was that I think that the platforms that can personalize to the user are the ones that are going to really be so successful. So they offer that same skeleton, but the way that you interact with it, the way that it works for you, reflects your teaching style or your learning style. Certainly, something that companies were promoting in BETT was how they are individual or personalized to the user themselves. So hopefully, if as a teacher or an educator, you find platforms and edtech that really suit your students, then you won't become digitally saturated. Though I can definitely understand why some people are feeling this way after the last couple of years, something that we'd never really experienced before, certainly not in education. Now, I'm going to talk really quickly on behalf of Tom, because if you've never come across Tom before, Tom has really made a name for himself during the COVID experience. Tom has founded 3 different companies. He has founded Teachers Talk Radio, which is a radio station that has shows running throughout the day. You can find them online. You can go back and listen live or listen to the recordings. He has also founded Teachmeeticons. They're CPD days, free CPD days that are both streamed on YouTube and you can attend them yourselves. And Edudate, which just before this webinar, Tom shared with me that the first Edudate baby is due in August. This is a teacher's dating service, I guess.
This is much bigger news than anything we've discussed in the world of EdTech globally is a single baby being born. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
This is so much more vital to life. Yeah. This is real life.
Yes, it is. But I also think, Tom, that what you managed to do was to find this new community of teachers who suddenly realized what there was out there in this global classroom. And you've been able to help connect them and get them to share. Oh, you're back with us with 1 minute left. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with us and with the people who've joined us today?
Only in that I think that BETT, and I think we've discussed this, the whole thing demonstrated how much desire and how much need there is for digital innovation still, and how much growth there will be, because I honestly don't think we've seen yet the impact of the pandemic on, we haven't seen those long-term results yet. So everything we're discussing here, it's going to blossom, it's going to grow, and we're probably only going to see it in 5 years' time. But I think what we're talking about and the direction of travel is very much towards more digital integration into classrooms, into schools. You can see the number of new startups emerging at BETT around classroom innovation, integrating technology into the classroom. It's huge, like huge numbers of new innovations, companies, apps, and whatever. So if there's anything I've taken away, it's that.
Oh, There you go. That was your digital saturation alarm again.
There we go. That was my final point.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and Tom, for your insights and your reflections. If any of you would like to continue this conversation further, you can link up with us on Twitter. So if you want to talk with Tom, it's at Rogers History, or with John or myself, it's at Bulback Global. The QR code on your screen in front of you will link you to a page that just shares an outline of our webinar today and includes these slides as well, if you'd like to share them with colleagues or continue that conversation further. Thank you so much for your time today. We've really enjoyed it.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, John. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.